Some of those Bundabergs.
Oh.
You know, the not the ginger beer ones, the other ones.
Lemon, lime, and bitters.
Yeah, that's quite a good one. Because I drink, and so you go to a pub and there's like ginger beer and Coke. But with the Bundaberg range, you've got all of these other, you know, guava and all sorts of stuff. And I find it frustrating that more bars just don't have them out there. Just, you know.
I guess as a percentage of patrons in a bar.
Well, no, I don't think it's. I would guess say 5% of the population drink. So that's and I mean, ginger beer is a bit disgusting.
Although the age of drink driving now, increased consciousness.
I quite like that Heineken 00 though.
Really, I've never tried it. Does it taste like beer?
If
you don't drink, how do you know it tastes like beer?
Because I used to drink.
Oh,
I gave it up. It gave me heartburn. It gives me heartburn not drinking. I can do. But no, that it's the Heineken 00. It's not really 00. It's like 0.01 or something. Whatever. It's like homeopathic alcohol.
There's a glass of homeopathic wine, Damien. Enjoy.
Oh, magnificent.
Okay. I'm wondering if does that say 1 o'clock? We're just about not quite there.
What's that live counting up or down?
That's how long we have been live for.
No, it's 12:59.
Okay.
So, other than our wives, how many people watch this?
I haven't told my wife that this is on yet.
Okay.
It'll be a nice surprise if she's trouble sleeping tonight.
Who is that fat, ugly guy you have next to you?
Oh dear. And on that note, I'll call that 1 o'clock. What do you reckon?
We'll go.
Okay. Good afternoon, those in attendance and those here. I'm Michael Vukcevic from Gilligan Shepherd. I'm part of the advisory practice here at Gilligan Shepherd. With me today for our live conversation, we're very fortunate to have Damien Grant.
Very fortunate.
That's very fortunate, and soon to be entertained. Damien, do you want to give us a quick intro about yourself and what you do?
I am a liquidator with a firm called Waterstone Insolvency. I also write for the Sunday Star Times. I have a column there, comes out every Sunday, and also on Sean Plunkett's working group at Magic FM at 2:30. So tune in because we need the ratings. So me, Sean Plunkett, and Martin Bradbury. I'm a libertarian, take a fairly contrarian approach. In a New Zealand setting, it's a contrarian. In an American setting, it would be probably a bit more mainstream.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Now, as is appropriate, two things were about. Given your last article on Sunday, we should now make you sit through the New Zealand safety video, we'll skip that.
Well, what about the Rachel Hunter one? Because Rachel Hunter, man, she will go on forever. At the end, at the very end of New Zealand, there will be a Rachel Hunter commercial. I am sure she is perpetual. She will live forever in our hearts.
I'm sure we'll talk about Tip Top later on. Also have to provide a disclaimer. Our insurers have asked me to read a little brief statement. Any comments that Damien makes are those of Damien and not necessarily reflective of the firm or myself, although I suspect lots of people would wonder.
Look, I'd be fairly confident that neither the Herald on Sunday, the NBR, or staff have been sued as a result. In fact, I haven't even had any press complaints, which is frankly disappointing.
Let's see how we go. So what we want to cover today is a number of questions and topics about your view on what's happening in the economy and society in general in New Zealand, the threats and opportunities that you think we face, as well as some of the external influences that may have an impact, either for a positive or negative, for New Zealand as we move forward. So in your role as primarily and when you're not writing music reviews or other articles for the Sunday Star Times, in your role as an insolvency practitioner, what sort of level of activity are you seeing now relative to the peak of insolvency in terms of the New Zealand economy? Because
it's pretty quiet. So compared to the peak year was 2011, 2012, with the level of insolvencies were up at about the 4,500 mark. They're now down to the low 2,000s. So we're simply not seeing a large amount of insolvencies coming through. And the sort of people who are getting into trouble now, back in 2011 and 12, we were seeing good companies with good management get into trouble as a hangover of the GFC.
Right.
Because you've got to remember, in a recession, firms don't fail straight away. Most firms have a lot of legacy, fat creditors they can run out, resources they can draw on. And so you have a long tail before you get to the big insolvency wash up. So it was around 2011, 2012 that insolvency got really, really busy. So I wouldn't expect to see a lot of activity from an insolvency perspective until a couple of years after when things hit. But the organizations that we are seeing failing now, typically there is something systemically wrong with the business or the people running it that it's getting into trouble.
So can you elaborate on some of those common threads that you're seeing either within the directors or the way that businesses are operating that are ultimately leading to your door?
Well, I need to put out there first that I have a selection bias. So the people I see are only those that have failed. So I may not be seeing a representative of all business. But the sort of traits of the people who I see now, as opposed to 2012, the traits that you tend to see: lack of attention to detail, lack of discipline, a failure to acknowledge reality. So there's a certain refusal to accept that the market has gone against them, that there is the competition is young and is eating at their heels. So you see those company directors who lie to themselves, predominantly male. The vast majority of company directors who get into trouble are men. Now, in terms of small business, it will be disproportionately men. It's probably 80% of men who run small business. But for those who get into our door, it's probably 99% of men. So that's the sort of thing we see. But I want to point out that those sorts of traits may well be the sort of traits of entrepreneurs generally. So because, Gilligan Shepherd, you may have, 100 clients, 98 of them might do well, 2 of them get in trouble. You're probably in a better position than I am to see the sort of traits of those who come unstuck. But I will say that you go back to 2011 and 2012, there we were seeing good business people who had done nothing wrong get into trouble because the market had just fallen out underneath them.
Or legacy debt issues, or just really because markets had changed and they hadn't kept up?
No, legacy debt isn't really a problem because the insolvency regime allows for good companies to organise their way through legacy debt issues. So there are no shortage of ways that a company that is profitable, the company might die, but the business won't. You can either sell the profitable business to somebody else, or you can restructure your debts, or you can get investors. So legacy debt typically kill a company if it's trading in the black.
Those traits that you do describe of those either directors or business people, you're right. You could equally be describing very successful entrepreneurs. But there is a fine line between that determination, passion to succeed, and willingness to accept good advice. Yes. And I guess that is, partly our selection bias as well, that we're generally working with those organisations that are willing to take good advice, that do listen and are willing to make change. Otherwise, why beat your head against a brick wall?
The satisfaction of beating your head against a brick wall. Sometimes I do that in the morning.
It feels so good when you stop. So in terms of some of the higher profile insolvencies here, and for example, CBL, which I know you're not hugely familiar with, but there's a business that was valued on the stock market, in theory, a highly regulated environment with lots of oversight by numerous organisations, well-audited accounts, etc., that had a market cap of close to $800 million.
Well, I haven't followed the CBL case at all. We might come back to another one PBL in a second. But one thing I will say about CBL is I had a coffee earlier in the year with a director of one of the banks who lost some money. And their view was that the regulators moved too fast, and that they said that the CBL failed as a result of the regulatory action. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not. But you go back and you have a look at, okay, you've got good sets of accounts. Right? So We saw just recently there was a big settlement in a company called PBL.
Yes.
That wasn't really an audit issue, but you had a situation where a large accounting firm was providing evaluations, and you kind of get put into that situation where things are not what they seem on paper. I think, and a classic one was Mainfield and the decision that came out there. So here you had a situation where you had a company that had a good balance sheet. You have a look at the balance sheet, and these were accounts signed off by the auditors, and what you had was something like a $44 million intercompany account that was never collectible. The money was owed ultimately by an entity in China. The money could never have been contained anyway. You had a former prime minister who was chair of the board. These set of accounts were apparently, according to the judgment, available for the creditors to look at. The creditors would come in there, they could have a look at the mains of the balance sheet, and it looked pretty good. But the reality was that if you were to scratch beneath the surface, hey, all of a sudden there was a $44 million hole. So just because, and Michael, this will shock you, I know, but sometimes, not very often, but in rare circumstances, sometimes people will not be fully honest with the people they're dealing with in business. I know it's difficult to come to grips with, but people shouldn't always take stuff at face value.
Indeed. And in terms of, we talk about balance sheets, just recently, as in yesterday, I think it was announced the sale of TipTop. And of course, we had the political noise, New Zealand Icon now being sold from under our feet. What's your take on that sort of activity in the New Zealand economy? Does this point to a confidence level, or is this just purely a valid strategic decision for Fonterra and its shareholders?
I only wish that the New Zealand Icon being sold under our feet with Winston Peters, but no, he stays with us. And the criticism of Fonterra for selling this asset is misplaced. Here you've got Fonterra have fairly well-known balance sheet issues, and they need to deal with those issues. And so you've got, I think it was $380 million that was the purchase price. From all accounts, that was a good price. And so, okay, Winston can, oh my God, we've lost TipTop ice cream. But actually, we've got $380 million. How is it? That would be like saying, oh, we have this bag of milk powder. We're going to lose this bag of milk powder, and all we're getting in return is US dollars. Well, the analogy is the concern about losing TipTop is complete madness. $380 million has come into our economy. It's come off the Fonterra balance sheet. Fonterra is now in a stronger financial position than they were before. The issues that got Fonterra to that point, though, I think there are issues there at the Fonterra model, but I think that's specific to that than a general economy-wide thing.
Right. And of course, I guess Winston could have easily asked Shane Jones to perhaps buy it out of the provincial fund.
Or the Cullen Fund could have purchased it.
ACC.
There was no what's it, Earthquake Commission? There's no shortage of government quangos that they could have purchased it. I think we should be thankful that it wasn't, that it went to overseas.
And yet we see Vodafone being acquired now by Infratil, and I think a Canadian pension fund.
But wasn't, let's not forget that at some point, I think it was Ontario Teachers Fund purchased Yellow Pages.
That's right.
So and what do they get for that? That was a fantastic wealth transfer between New Zealand, or the shareholders of Yellow, and the Ontario Teachers. So the fact that something is sold isn't necessarily a problem. And we have a look at Telecom. Yeah, we sold Telecom. Preble sold Telecom for $4 billion. But you look at what was sold. It was a broken, shambolic wreck. What we ended up getting was a state-of-the-art telecommunication system that provided far more value to New Zealanders than we ever have got from any dividends that would have come out of that thing.
So in terms of when we look at some of the major challenges or the commentary around what's wrong in New Zealand at the moment, maybe we can start on housing.
There's a lack of old white guys with beards. That's the problem in New Zealand. We need more old white guys with beards, and then everything will be fine.
Do you hear that, New Zealand? We'll get Bruce in here as well. In terms of some of the challenges that seem to be top of the mainstream media on a daily or weekly basis has to do with the housing supply and demand in New Zealand. Kiwi Build or Kiwi Flop seems to be the football of choice at the moment. What's your view on either the success or failure of that, and really where the government should or shouldn't be involved?
So it was about 10 years ago, the Productivity Commission did a report on the problems with housing in New Zealand. Why are our houses so expensive?
Mm-hmm.
And they identified a couple of issues. One, relatively small nature of our market, which meant that we were building bespoke homes, so you weren't having the huge cookie cutter stuff that you would see in some other jurisdictions. But the other thing they pointed out, we have an overly burdensome regulatory process,
Mm-hmm.
which means that if you're going to spend $500,000-$600,000 building a house,
Mm-hmm.
100,000 to 200,000 of that is the regulatory process to get there. So we have, with the Building Code, the Resource Management Act, all of these layers of government regulation means it's just very hard, slow, and expensive to build houses. That's why we have a housing problem. This is a government-created problem. We are about the same size as Japan and the United Kingdom, with about the same number of people as 2 or 3 suburbs in Tokyo. We have no shortage of land. What we have is a failure of political will to allow our builders to do what they do, which is build houses. The government solution to this is, hey, the government has created this problem. They're now going to go and try and solve this problem by building houses. Well, guess what? It didn't work, and it was never going to work. The whole thing was a political stunt right from the very get-go. When Cullen and Shearer were arguing over the leadership, one of them popped up and says, hey, we're going to build 100,000 houses. It was never costed. It was never thought out. It was just a policy gimmick. Now, poor old Phil Twyford has been given, here's a basket. We want you to fill it up with loaves and fishes. Well, he can't. So, although I do note that as the economy, there's some sort of rumblings out there in the economy at the moment, house prices are coming down. So I think one option for the government would simply be turn around and say house prices have come down, declare victory, and just walk away.
Don't give them ideas. So in terms of the lack of political will, that sort of is, again, another nice segue, Damien, into what happened around the discussion around and the debate, lack of debate around the capital gains tax. We had the working group, we had the proposal that was out there, there was plenty of sucking going on, and lo and behold, nothing happened. Now, keen to understand your views on why that didn't happen, but to me it was really interesting to observe the Taxpayers Union and potential impact they've had on the landscape in New Zealand. Typically they are perceived as a sort of a rich person's right-wing sort of advocacy group, but yet they managed to communicate to middle New Zealand, which is where the battleground is won and lost. So do you think this is a start of things that will change in New Zealand?
I don't know if it's a start that things will change, Michael. I mean, I'm a member of the Taxpayers Union, and I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm a relatively rich person who don't feel that wealthy. So, and the membership of the Taxpayers Union is reasonably broad and diverse. But I don't know whether it's a change. But you come back and you have a look at it was really interesting. You had Simon Bridges out there championing but I think you're right. It was the Taxpayers Union was probably the most effective group making a noise. I mean, you also had the New Zealand Initiative. I mean, they were doing some really good work. But in credit to Jordan Williams, he got up there and he is a very good advocate and spokesman. And he's just got that knack. So I don't know whether this is necessarily the start of something to come, or whether this is simply a function of one particular talented individual having an impact. But you come back and you have a look at what happened there. Look, we will never know. My suspicion is, or the public reason given by the Prime Minister was that New Zealand First were against it, and she couldn't get it past the cabinet table. Now, and look, sometimes Occam Rosa, maybe that's what really happened. But there's another interpretation. And the other interpretation is the Prime Minister sat up there, she looked at Bridges, she looked at the Taxpayers Union and the Initiative and the other people campaigning against it. And she probably thought, you know what? I quite like going to Davos. I quite like being in this prime minister gig. The limos are all, they've got heated seats. It's nice. If I try and implement this capital gains tax, and it was a really aggressive one that Cullen had proposed, she may well have been a one-term prime minister. So given, and we never know because we can't work into the prime minister's mind, but it may well be that Winston's objection was a convenient out for the prime minister, because if this was something that was really important to this government, they could have put it to the parliament, made it a confidence and supply issue,
Right.
forced Winston to vote it down, and then use that. It wouldn't technically have been a confidence and supply, or they could have put it in the budget and they would have made it confidence and supply. So they put it in there, Winston votes it down, you go to the polls. You say, right, that's it. Chances are Winston to be out, and then it's a 2-horse race between Labour and National, and then Jacinda Ardern back to herself to beat Simon Bridges, whoever they put in, and then she could have got it. So that's one of the options that the Prime Minister had, and coming off a very high approval ratings at the moment, you've got to give her a bit of 50-50 chance that she would have got that over the line. She didn't. So I think what you are seeing there is, but also let's not forget, there was a minority report in that working group.
Yep, 9-3, I think, in the
Yep.
Yep.
I think it was 2. I think it was only 2. Anyway.
Joanne Hodge was one. Yep.
So the objection was that this was going to create as much cost and paperwork and administration as it was going to raise in revenue, and that you could be looking at decades before any serious revenue was raised from this, well outside the lifetime of this government. So it may well have been that the economic realities of what was being proposed, that the government objectively looked at this and says, no, we're not doing this. It's just economic madness.
Or do you think also that the reality is, it was very much seen as Cullen's will get you rich pricks, because if you own a house or assets, we're going to get you. Or the reality was that I believe, and as part of that election campaigning, this will solve the housing problem. Now, it was pretty clear that all of the research on capital gains tax, it doesn't actually fix housing problems or housing issues. Just look at Sydney. So maybe there's part of that. But not only did the Prime Minister and the Labour government back down, she retreated in terms of this will never happen while I'm Prime Minister or leader of the Labour Party. Words to that effect, similar to the John Key superannuation age debate. But in terms of your comment again around the comforts of travelling to and from Davos, travelling to and from Paris is not necessarily a bad thing either. And of course, as we speak, there is a lot of discussion and debate going on around potential impacts on our freedom, the freedom of speech here in New Zealand. I know that's something you're quite passionate about. So what's your take on this reaction or overreaction to, obviously the dreadful things that happened in Christchurch?
It's not great. What happened in Christchurch, I actually think in some ways we've moved on a little bit from the tragedy too quickly. It's just 51 people. It's mind numbing to, and I remember when it happened and there was a pressure to write something about it, and I think I made the comment, I don't want to write about it because what can you say? And one of the few times I actually regret having a column, because having to articulate how you feel on something like that is really hard. The reaction though, and we need to do something. This is
something
we need to do something. And this was, I don't agree with the gun laws. I think that was a mistake. But in a sense, doing something on the guns means that we collectively did something. I think there was a degree of cathartic, yes, this hasn't gone unnoticed. So even though I disagree with that particular political decision, I think it was perhaps good for New Zealand that we did that and that we were seen to have a collective response. The free speech thing is different, I think, because I think there were latent authoritarian desires that have been given credence and authority and momentum by what's happening now. So, and you see it all. They're talking about, hey, we're gonna cut down on hate speech. Well, it's a very selective type of hate speech that they're going after. There is, in my view, and maybe it's a subjective view, I mean, I see a lot of stuff like this stuff that Hamas is coming out with, and I look at that and I think, you know what, that is some fairly vile anti-Semitic stuff that there's people just pouring out. The white supremacists, in my view, are no different. They have a similar toxic worldview, and that's where all the focus is going. But you come back a step. That matters, because what is happening is that the government, or whatever regulatory agents they put in charge, is deciding what is hate speech and what isn't. And and I don't think we even need new hate speech laws to see what's going to happen. There's a guy in Christchurch, the insulation Nazi guy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, no question, this guy's a Nazi, right? And he's, from all accounts, just an appalling human being. But also from the media reports and from the police comments, he had nothing to do with the shooting. He was just your run-of-the-mill, stock-standard neo-Nazi. I don't think we have that many of them in New Zealand, but we certainly got at least one.
Right.
The government appears to have decided we need to get this guy. And so they continue to investigate him until they found something to get him with. So he shared the video. He is not alone.
Right.
I mean, out where I live on the North Shore, half the kids in the secondary school have been sharing and watching that video. If the crime was sharing the video, half of Rangitoto College would be incarcerated.
And it's not a Nazi enclave.
No, I'm pretty sure it's not a Nazi enclave. But what's happened is, because we have this law, this catch-all law that says, if the state decides that what you have forwarded is offensive, then that's a crime, and we can put you in jail for as long as 14 years. So we got this Nazi who was celebrating what happened, a reprehensible human being, and the government has looked for an excuse to put him in prison. What that means is that almost any of us, if the state looks hard enough, can find something to put us in incarceration for. And you got to remember that this Nazi forwarded on the video.
Right.
The censor declared that after he shared it, he came out and said it was offensive. That's a technical interpretation of the law. It was always offensive. The censor just, classified it. So it's not quite retrospective. It would be unfair to say it was a retrospective application. But if this now is extended out more generally, and the view of, so what is considered objectionable is fairly low standard. If you have a look, probably about half of what is standard pornography could be considered, or is explicitly mentioned as obscene under the relevant legislation. So sharing an explicit sexual video could be deemed as obscene. So it's not a good place for us to go, and we are going further. And other than David Seymour, nobody seems to give a damn. I mean, Simon Bridges is saying, well, we'll have a look, but it's very disappointing.
As devil's advocate here, so you're suggesting that society on its own, the more of the guy in Christchurch, the scintillation guy, I can't even recall his name.
Yeah.
Are you saying that the existing law will work to apprehend or stop more, if there were more? And who knows? We just don't know. Let's say there were 100 or 200 or 1,000 of these, and MediaWorks seem to think there's tens of thousands of them in the country. Do you think was your view that the current law, or society in general, should turn around and identify these people and say, hey, that's just not on. That is offensive. We're not going to give you the oxygen to it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a perfect response. So once it was, the media found this guy and outed him, right? So I wouldn't use this goddamn business. I mean, to hell with him. I'd be reluctant to have him drive an Uber. And there was another example, which I think is taken a little bit too far, but there's a couple of real estate agents on the shore who had a Facebook page. It was, they posted some fairly offensive stuff. The media found them. They were fired. They got another job. Media hounded them again, and they were fired. Now, I actually think in that situation, I haven't actually seen what they posted. But that is, in a sense, there's free speech. But free speech doesn't mean speech without consequences.
Right.
So if you say something, as this real estate agent said, if you say something that is outside what is considered accepted by the community, then the community can respond and need to see what they posted. But the community says, you know what, we don't want to deal with you commercially. There is a consequence for saying stuff that is really offensive. We don't, and we shouldn't be putting people in jail for that. There is a degree of self-regulation and self-discipline that I think does work without putting people in cages.
Well, I'm concerned that you're painting the North Shore. Are you trying to drive the price of houses down in the North Shore?
So I can buy more.
So you can buy more. Now we have had a question come through. Let me just bring this up.
Is it seeking fashion advice?
Of course.
Hairstyling.
So one has come in. You've sort of answered it, but I'll raise it again. The sale of TipTop and Vodafone, do you think the economic repercussions will be, or what do you think the flow-on repercussions? I know you've talked about Fonterra, obviously $380 million, but I assume that's going off to some Swiss banker to reduce their debt. Is it considered a win for Fonterra and their business model or their industry? And do you envision a lot of other businesses will follow suit?
Well, so having a look at Fonterra, Fonterra have a fairly widely acknowledged balance sheet issue.
Right.
So in terms of the solvency of Fonterra, this must be seen as a good thing. And I think you can probably expect to see more asset sales from Fonterra as they seem to get that down. And I think Fonterra should move to a more simpler model of just selling milk powder, but that's from Fonterra. Commodity milk powder, right? So if farmers want to diversify, they can diversify on their own without going through Fonterra. But that's an issue for Fonterra and their but so I think in the end, because the other thing, if TipTop was owned by a firm, Fonterra, which had capital constraints, and Fonterra has institutional issues raising capital because of its
the cooperative structure.
Yeah. So now they're in the hands of somebody else, an organisation with deep pockets and the ability to invest inside TipTop that will, because you've got to remember, you get worried about the dividends. Don't worry about the dividends. They're tiny. Look at the amount of money that these guys are going to invest in the country. If you're a farmer and you want diversification, you might have the opportunity to sell stuff to TipTop. They're going to need to employ more people. They will be building and enhancing presumably their plants whenever. So this is a good thing for all of those people who supply TipTop. In terms of the Vodafone thing, presumably Vodafone wasn't owned by a New Zealand entity.
No, it's Vodafone UK.
Exactly.
So it makes no difference.
Some wealthy foreigner for another wealthy foreigner.
Who cares? And in terms of TipTop, I think what's interesting, it has some similarity to when Fonterra was formed, and they had to sell off Dairy Foods, and Graham Hart, picked that up for a song. I think part of the key for Fonterra, this being a good deal or bad deal, is the terms of the supply agreement for the fresh milk and cream and other ingredients. If TipTop continues to buy that at a good price, they will continue to still capture good margin. They'll tanker milk up from Takanini and cream from that should do quite well. But then if you look at the Yellow Pages for an example, or others that we think of, let's say Fonterra, the new owners, 5 or 10 years, there's nothing to say they might not. They might need to divest of it pretty quickly if it doesn't pan out, because there's only so much ice cream you can eat in New Zealand and in Fiji and in Australia. There is an element of risk. You do your bit.
In terms of eating ice cream.
Indeed. Another question that's come in, somebody from Albany on the North Shore.
Probably one of my staff.
I just need to make sure I can read this. Yep, no, that's fine. This is more a professional question. You're involved with the EBIT insolvency.
Yeah.
What were the challenges in terms of going through that process of changing the undertaker? The liquidator. I think that was the first time that's happened
on a large scale. It was the first one. So I've got a small debt buying company with a reasonably large position. The the company went into receivership, we actually increased our position. So we're a bit of a Tempest is a bit of a vulture fund in that respect. So we bought a position fairly cheaply. We then made the decision. We went to court to have a liquidator appointed, and we wanted to use Ian Shepherd of BDO in Wellington.
Ian Bruce Shepherd, by the way, no relation.
No, I did not know that. Okay, good. They spell the surnames differently, don't
They
they?
do 1P versus 2.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digress.
Okay, cool. Good to know. We advised the shareholders or the receivers, and in fairly short order, they appointed their own liquidator, and we weren't happy with that choice for a number of reasons. So, but changing the liquidator was hard. So we put in a lot of work and a lot of effort. And we had presentations in Christchurch, Auckland, and Wellington in front of creditors. We manned the phones, but in order to change a liquidator, you need a majority by dollar value and a majority in notes. And it was only in the last couple of days, right at the death, that because there was a lot of big developers sitting out there, and there was intense lobbying going on behind the scenes to get over the line. But in fairness to the retiring liquidators in that situation, they acted with the utmost professionalism. Since then, we've been involved in several, lost the vote, and they said, "Oh, I have 12 proxies in my favour, and well, can you see them?" No. Well, you can't. Can you table them? No. And this particular individual was on the regulatory body. It was just incredible. We had another liquidator, so he put out his own postal vote, and he won. That's fine. He didn't have proxies. So in the room, we put a vote from the floor. Just flat out refused to hold the vote and remain. So for us, in that situation, we have to go to court. And there is one particular liquidator we are taking to court, where the liquidator was manufacturing proxies. He actually forged the proxies, and we were in the room, and the one of the lawyers advising one of the creditors said, "That creditor there, did they give you a proxy?" "Yes." The creditor was in the room and said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Oh, well, that's right," but they just, took it off, and it was outstanding. And so he started off with about 25 proxies in his favour, most of them for, Mohammed, somebody $200 from Bangladesh. It was by 4 of us to 5, just blatant manufacturing proxies.
Did Mohammed get his $200 from Bangladesh?
I don't know. It was a bit of a mess. It is disappointing though to see, because I'm a liquidator. I've been fired a couple of times. It's not great, but it happens. If you've been appointed by the shareholder, there's a perception that you're friendly to the shareholders, and that's fine. It's a beauty parade. If they want somebody else, they want somebody else. So it's almost as if we were successful on EBIT, and as soon as it's everybody now has changed their tactics to avoid future challenges from people like Tempest. And more disappointing because some of the more appalling behaviour is coming from so-called regulated and respectable insolvency firms.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Well, one question around New Zealand and where we are now. We've talked before about some of the economic and political challenges, headwinds or tailwinds that are coming. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for, first, people talk about New Zealand? I know you've got an opinion on that. And so what do you see as the real opportunity over the next 6 months? And what should people be aware of?
That is a huge question. And if I knew the answer, I would be driving a much better car than the one I currently have.
The black Lamborghini was what I said.
Yeah. If I had to guess, and I do, and I take my own advice in this area, I think at the moment, money is cheap. It is just ridiculously cheap, and it's incredibly easy to get.
Yes.
So my advice, if you want an opportunity, you look for an asset that will continue to provide a return, even in a downturn. You use the ridiculously cheap money that is available now to buy an asset that you can continue to service despite a downturn. That is probably the one opportunity. The I don't know how long these interest rates can remain where they are. I mean, Adrian Orr dropped they've now got a committee. They dropped the OCR down to 1.5, which is grotesquely and recklessly irresponsible. We are, even Keynes would turn in his grave at this sort of, where we've got record low unemployment. We continue to have positive economic growth. There are some headwinds offshore maybe, but here you are running an incredibly loose monetary policy in the middle of an economic boom. So if there is an economic downturn, what's the one monetary policy left? Printing money. So if you were to take on debt, there is a real good chance that Adrian Orr, based on his past behaviour and his speeches and, in my view, his toadying and kowtowing to the state, is going to run a very loose monetary policy in response to a downturn, and that results in inflation. So
quantitative easing, or the New Zealand version of it, you think is a possibility?
I would go it's much more than a possibility. I would say it's a probability. So you have a situation, at the moment, the Crown books are still in surplus. I think they're probably a lot softer than what's been reported. Because on the one hand, you've got a slight, the economic growth is slowing. It's a long way from going negative, but economic growth is slowing. Government spending is ticking up. But more importantly than that, the fiscal responsibility has been loosened. So I think you're going to see us move into a deficit at some point between now and the end of this government's term. So if there is a downturn, what's the government going to do? I mean, this government will certainly spend money, absolutely. But Adrian Orr has demonstrated himself not to be a believer in monetary prudence. He is a long way from Don Brash. So, yeah, I would say quantitative easing is a near certainty under this government.
Well, if we certainly see where personal household debt levels, we talked about this earlier, that they are higher than what they were prior to the GFC, but the cost of servicing that debt is approximately half of what it was in 0708.
And so the Reserve Bank has a fantastic graph, a debt to income graph, and you can search it. It's brilliant. It shows on the one hand household income and then household debt. So in 2000 they're about 1 for 1. So household debt was 100, was about 99. Then up to the GFC, it was about 150% of debt to household income. So families were borrowing money. The servicing cost was 14% right before the GFC. Remember, the GFC was an external event that hit our shores, right? I mean, other than the finance companies' collapse, this was entirely an external event. We now our level of household debt is around the 160, 170 mark. It's higher than it was during the GFC. The cost of service is a mere 8%. So what that tells you, it tells you two things. One, our economy has been partially driven by consumers and potentially firms borrowing money, either consumption or investment. The data doesn't show up on how they're spending it. But also, if the cost of service is a mere 8%, the opportunity, the difference between 8 and 14 is massive. So our capacity to take on debt, we may have a long way to go before we run out of headroom.
So in terms of, if we weigh that up with the current environment, we have a looming teacher strike. There's this threat of ongoing industrial action, not just by teachers. I'm sure others will follow, as tends to be the pattern under a sort of labour socialist governments around the world. It just tends to happen. What do you see as in terms of the impact of that in terms of consumer confidence, right? Because if people are going to continue to borrow, maintain debt levels or grow them, they need to have some underlying confidence about what's going on around them, as well as their ability to service that debt.
I don't know how to answer that necessarily. I think people are going to need to, it does depend on what people are borrowing the money on. So if they are borrowing the money for investment purposes, that's earning them an economic return, that's great. But the problem is that they'll be they will be borrowing money at around 4%, hoping to get a 5-6% return. If things go pear-shaped, and that interest rate ever does come up, then a lot of those people are going to find themselves underwater. So, I My suspicion is that left to our own devices, this economic run has still quite a long way to go, but I think the unwinding when it comes is going to be really ugly. And this is where Adrian Orr and his committee made the 100% wrong decision. The decision should be, during the time of relative economic prosperity, they should be lifting the interest rate. So when thing does go pear-shaped, because you've got to remember the OCR at the time of the GFC was in the
7% or 6 point something. It was close.
So they went from 6 down to 1.75 fast. They pushed it back up again, and then it came down. So there was a lot of room for an easing of monetary policy. What on earth is Adrian Orr doing, dropping it now?
Not a lot of wiggle room. So how much credence do you put to the view that part of the reason New Zealand came through the GFC so well was the fact that the Australian banks were so strong and could continue to fund the New Zealand banks here?
I would place a lot of credence on that. I think a part of it also was you say the banks were strong. You've got to remember that the Australian government put in a federal guarantee scheme, right? So if the Australian banks were so strong, why do they need the backing of the federal government?
Psychology, perception, give people the confidence.
Okay, so they weren't that strong, or maybe it was just a panic by the Australian government that necessitated an equivalent response here in New Zealand. I think those Crown government guarantee schemes was an absolute disaster for the amount of cash that was burned in places like South Canterbury. Although I actually think, so coming back to that question, yes, I think the fact that our banks were owned overseas was a good thing then, and it's a good thing now. So if you've got money in TSB and you've got money in ASB, psychologically, you just know that that ASB is owned by big Australian conglomerate and it's Commonwealth Bank, and it's a slightly safer investment. So I think that the fact that our banks are really global now is a good thing, and I'm pleased to see that some of the Kiwibank, what a farce. Just give it up, really. Gives Bolger something to do, but I'm just put to bed.
One last question to follow some very rational and considered opinions. Continued support for the Vodafone Warriors. How does that fit?
Well, you see, support for the Warriors is based on faith, and I have a good Catholic upbringing. Sadly, I've lost my Catholic faith. I was unable to maintain my religion in the face of reason and rationality. So the Warriors is kind of like a replacement for that.
Surrogate for religion.
It's a surrogate for religion. If any person was to apply reason and rationality to the Warriors, it's not going to work. That's why we say it's about faith. Faith is believing in something in the absence of evidence and reason, and that's why kia kaha, we stay strong with the Warriors.
Thank you, Damien. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining in. Look forward to hearing from you all. Thumbnail.